buses, an ongoing series. Anyway, thank you for all being here on time, yourselves, and also for the people that have come to talk to us today about some very important issues on our agenda on the Environment, Housing and Communities Scrutiny Board. Shall we go straight into the niceties? Just to introduce to people who are invited today the membership of the board. We shall do that first, and then we will wait for your introductions, if you don't mind, when it comes to the discussion of the papers that you've come to speak to, if that's okay. So I'll just start with introductions to the board members. I'm Councillor Stuart Galton, and I'm chairing the board today.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Councillor Javed Akhtar, Little London and Woodhouse Ward.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Abdul Hanan for Headingley and High Park.
Morning, everyone. Councillor Andy Rowntree from Kirkstall.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Adrian McCluskey for Farnley and Wortley.
Good morning, Councillor John Tudor from Killingbeck and Seacroft.
Good morning, Councillor Penny Stables from Wetherby.
Morning, Councillor Simon Seary from the Pudsey Ward.
Morning, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlan Wharfdale Ward.
Morning, Norma Harrington, Councillor for Wetherby Ward.
And looking after us all today is
Becky Atherton, Scrutiny Advisor.
Okay, thank you. We'll go through the first few items of the agenda, which tend to be the more formal ones. So item 1, appeals against refusal of inspection of documents.
There are no appeals against refusals of inspection documents, Chair.
Items for exclusion and item 2.
No items for exclusion today.
Item 3, any late items of business?
We've no late items, Chair.
Item 4, any declarations of interest from anybody that have not already been declared? I'll take that as a no. Item 5, apologies.
We have apologies from James Roger, Director, and Councillor Maloney.
We'll go into the next item, which is item 6, where we will consider the minutes of the last meeting. Just to note, there are some areas to report back. We did discuss at a previous meeting, which covered the, I forgot what they call it now, the Proceeds of Crime Fund. That's it. And there was discussion on the board about whether or not this could be available to members on community committees to seek proposals to be put forward for their communities. And we have had confirmation back from Councillor Lowe, who is the Deputy Mayor with responsibility for crime and policing, that community committees would be able to apply to the fund alongside other community groups. So we'll be taking that up and including it within our community committee review. Councillor Akhtar.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I ask Becky if you can make a note of this, that I was the one who raised this because I felt across the city there are pockets where antisocial behavior is driving nuts our communities basically, and I think that the funding which is available from the Mayor's office or the Deputy Mayor's office could be utilised, and I really welcome the approach Alison has taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Akhtar. That's very useful. I think it will also be useful to get clarification on whether or not those funds can be used for both capital as well as revenue schemes, because that has been excluded in the past. On to item minute 46. The head of homelessness has provided an update in relation to the number of veterans presenting as homeless, which was an issue that was raised by members. And they have declared that in the past 12 months, we have completed assessments with 6 customers who stated that their main reasons for becoming homeless or threatened was due to leaving Her Majesty's forces. Of course, we will get further reports and updates from the homelessness team, so where we can keep an eye and monitor the statistics around that particular area of need. Any other comments on the minutes from members of the board? Okay, thank you very much. We'll now go on to item 7, which is around poverty and improving financial inclusion. We have rather a lot of people to talk to us today. So if you don't mind me saying so, when you're doing your introductory comments, can you please keep it relatively brief and hopefully provocative enough to elicit some really good questions from our board. So leading that discussion is Councillor Harland as the executive member. We also have in attendance Lee Hemsworth. I have Joe Rowlands as the financial inclusion manager. And then from outside of the council, we have Diane Leon, or is it Lyon? Diane Lyons, Citizen Advice Leeds, Hannah Bailey from Voluntary Action Leeds, Rifat Malik from Give a Gift, and Chris Joyce and Gemma Sharrett from the Department of Work and Pensions. Really appreciate your presence today, and I'm going to let Councillor Harland lead the introduction.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure that the board have read what I would say is a really interesting and good report. I say this often when bringing this sort of thing, that to say it's a good report is sometimes feels a little bit difficult to say, as the nature of the content is not always great reading. I'm sure you've got lots of questions for all these guests that we have today, so there's lots of good stuff in there. These people do lots of great work alongside the officers of the council, unstintingly, never ending, before and ahead of the curve often in the things that they implement and put in place. So I'll sure you've got lots of questions for them, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Harland. Lee Hemsworth wishes to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought I'd give an overview more in terms of how we work in the city, and then obviously that gives colleagues the opportunity to come in, and just for their benefit, if we do it this way, if that's right, Diane. So you go first, if that's okay. If that's okay with everybody. So this, as Councillor Harland said, this is a very detailed report, even more so because it's got an even more detailed executive board report attached on the same subject. So we've tried not to duplicate that. We put the exec board in there so that you have that information. We do re-emphasize certain data and things like that in the body of the report. So some things are repeated, but it's important that that's in there. It's important that you get all of that information. Obviously, colleagues here, partners are here to give their update. I think it's important to say that, you know, the way that things work in this city have worked this way since the early 2000s, in terms of there's a very sort of collegiate partnership approach in the city. So whenever partners, and that includes the council, talk about what they do, it's very much done from that perspective of partnership, and we're all collectively working in that. In terms of our approach, certainly in the last 12 months, so we bring this report on an annual basis to provide an update, and certainly last year when we came, we were just starting the process around what we were doing around the cost of living. So this provides an update on that. We have taken a very coordinated and integrated approach to that. We've tried to be very practical last year and continue to be so now. We have focuses around communication, information, advice and guidance, practical support, funding and evidence and reporting. And you'll see examples of that throughout this report. So we do, during the summer, we ran a number of, or we are running a number of thematic meetings started in the summer. So it mentions there housing, children's services, health, crime, community safety. We had a third sector one last week. We've got others coming up around crisis support, etc. Coming up. So as we're here, we'll talk partners here to give their update. I mean, generally, I think they recognise that everybody's facing a rising level of demand, higher costs, an increase in financial uncertainty, and certainly demand for things like advice services remains high because of inflation, energy costs, and inadequate levels of income, etc. We've tried to use funding opportunities locally to reinforce and enhance what we do through those themes that I mentioned before in terms of, you know, practical support. A big chunk of that is government funding. So we are reliant on that, and it needs to be recognised that, you know, that's not sustained, or, you know, it's fairly precarious, and it's given on an annual basis, and it's not a sustainable level of funding. So there is a risk there. But I think it's fair to say that despite, as a city, doing the best we can, the resources are not enough, and there are still people that, despite the best efforts of everybody in this room and all the other partners in the city who focus on this agenda, there's still things that we can't do to help people alleviate the issues, and I'm sure colleagues will mention some of those things. So we continue to work together on that. There are some risks, certainly in terms of that funding, that could impact on what we're able to do going forward. But I think as a city, we do work really well and really positively together. And I think the information in this report hopefully stands up to that. So if that's okay, I'll pass it over to Diane.
Thanks, Lee. So I'm Diane Lyons. I'm Chief Executive at Citizens Advice Leeds. As Lee says, I'll probably kind of talk in terms of the advice sector as a whole, not just my organisation, but partners as well. I won't rehearse, you know, the data that's in the report. I think we're all probably pretty clear about how grim the situation is for many people in the city. I wanted to really just say a little bit about our response in the sector and what we're trying to do to try and respond to that kind of avalanche of need and demand that we've seen over the recent years, on top of what was already there. And I just wanted to start by really commending our staff and volunteers in the sector who, as Councillor Harland alluded to, they just work so hard to respond to this level of demand. Really, really difficult situations that they're talking to people about day after day, puts them under enormous amount of stress. And I'm just constantly impressed that they remain patient and kind and helpful when they're working under such pressure to help the people come into a state day by day. They're the heart of it all. They're what makes it happen. I've mentioned that demand we have, and again in the report it talks about in particular areas like energy, where demand I think has kind of tripled in recent years for the reasons that we all know. We've been happy to help issue some of the vouchers funded through the Household Support Fund, which obviously makes an enormous difference to people in crisis. But beyond that, I'd also emphasise that what we do goes beyond that. So, for example, when we saw the big increases in energy prices, as part of that, we saw some energy firms acting pretty unscrupulously. And as one example, amongst many, an elderly lady living on her own in a small flat, her energy bill was about £100 a month on direct debit. Her energy provider overnight put that to £500 a month. She spoke to them, tried to get it changed. They wouldn't budge. She contacted us, we got involved, they backed down and reduced it back to a reasonable amount and refunded the amount that was owed to her. But we saw that time and again, and it's frankly unscrupulous behaviour by energy providers on occasion. And on occasion, they've not responded even to our interventions, and we have to report them to the Ombudsman to get them to act within the law. We've worked really hard to try and get extra resources so that we can respond. We've been fortunate to get a bit of extra resource that's helped us to put more staff onto the telephone service, which is where we see the highest level of demand. And we've actually been able to double the amount of calls we answer in the last few months. And we're working to increase that further over the remainder of the year. But that is short term, it's fixed term funding. So beyond this financial year, I'm not quite sure where we'll go from there. And alongside this, we've seen, and I think, I'm sure we're all very conscious of this, increasing mental health issues amongst people approaching us for help. Again, people talking about their very, very desperate situations, people talking about they can't see any prospect of their circumstances improving, to the extent that some clients talk about suicidal thoughts when they're talking to staff because they just feel such desperation. We often are able to improve their situation. So it's that combination for me, is we can offer that practical advice. We do improve people's finances. Often, I have to say, by getting them benefits that they've been wrongfully deprived of, which can increase people's incomes by hundreds and thousands of pounds. But in response to that, we've developed some new projects. We're working in partnership with Leeds Mind and the Trussell Trust to develop a partnership that's trying to get help to people in critical situations who are also in mental health crisis. That's a new partnership, one of 6 pilots in the country that we're developing. And we're also talking to Community Links and other partners about how we can design services that really try and address the needs of those particular clients. So I'll finish there. Very, very brief summary. Happy to take questions.
Morning, everyone. So I'm Hannah Bailey. I'm the Chief Officer at Voluntary Action Leeds. So we're an infrastructure support organisation for the third sector in the city. So I'm going to just talk briefly around the role that we've played in terms of support and coordination to third sector groups and organisations across the city in relation to this agenda. And for us, this is a continuation of the great partnership approaches that happened during the pandemic. And from Voluntary Action Leeds, Val's point of view, one of our key pieces of work over the last couple of years has been the development of the Leeds Community Anchor Network, which is a positive legacy of the work that happened during the pandemic. As has already been touched upon, and obviously Diane touched upon, particularly in terms of the role of staff and volunteers across third sector organisations, it is a challenging environment for groups and organisations in terms of the impact of cost of living on organisations and groups themselves, which is acknowledged in the report. So I'm going to touch on 2 kind of key areas from our perspective. The first is the Household Support Fund, which several key networks and organisations within the city have been in receipt of, working in partnership with our colleagues at the council. So that includes the Leeds Community Anchor Network, the Leeds Food Aid Network, and Forum Central, who are the infrastructure organisation for health and care in the city. And I think we do need to recognise that the approach that Leeds has taken to Household Support Fund does differ from other parts of the country. So I have regular conversations with colleagues in other infrastructure organisations, including in the other core cities. And I think, Leeds is really to be commended for its approach to the Household Support Fund and use of that investment and making use of existing partnerships and networks to ensure that that money actually gets out into communities and to the individuals who need it the most. And I think it's also recognition of, the role, reach and trust of third sector organisations within the city, which is definitely acknowledged by our local authority partners. In terms of that practical support then, from a Leeds Community Anchor Network perspective, we've been in receipt of Household Support Fund since its inception. Since between April and October of this year, members of the Anchor Network across the city were able to provide support to just over 5,400 households through that funding. And that's very practical support in terms of fuel vouchers, food and other kind of practical essentials. In terms of the work that Forum Central have done, they've got a rolling grants programme for groups and organisations working with particular communities of interest across the city. So they have that programme running on a rolling basis, and they see increased demand for that support during the autumn and winter months, and they've been able to provide funding to some frontline organisations working with particular groups and communities. Just turning then to the Welcome Spaces programme, which is also outlined in the report, and obviously took place last year under the Warm Spaces banner. So we've worked very closely with local authority colleagues and those organisations that provided warm spaces last year to run the programme again this year under the Welcome Spaces banner. So as well as obviously the council's libraries and community hubs offering welcome spaces, we've also had expressions of interest from 157 voluntary community and faith organisations across the city to offer a welcome space within their communities. And this year we've approached that a little differently, in that the funding that's come to Voluntary Action Leeds, we've then devolved down to the Leeds Community Anchor Network. So that local coordination and distribution of funding for welcome spaces has been managed by local community anchors working with other partners and that local ecosystem of groups and organisations to ensure that that support is available in communities across the city. So I'm going to leave it there and hand across to my colleague Rifat, who will be able to talk in more detail about some of the local work that's happened around both Household Support Fund and Welcome Spaces. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rifat Malik. I'm the director and co-founder of Give a Gift charity. Firstly, it's lovely to see everybody. I know it's a rainy day and cold, but it's a pleasure to be here. We are one of the 2 cultural food hubs in Leeds, and I'm not sure if everyone's aware of that, but we cover the east of Leeds and Hamara covers the north, west and south of Leeds. I'm actually thankful to the council because since its inception during the pandemic, I think it was a positive move in terms of providing emergency food provision to the diverse communities that we serve in our localities. So that's been running since the pandemic, and obviously now with the cost of living, we're dealing with it even more so now than ever. We're also running healthy holidays. So thanks to Joe Rowlands and the team, we're running healthy holidays provisions, warm spaces. Hannah's just touched upon that, which has now become the welcome spaces. But to sort of give you a little bit of an insight, I think things were going okay during the pandemic. I mean, we had to deal with the pandemic. We were serving our communities the best we could. And then when the pandemic was, well, over to some extent, we were hit with a cost of living crisis. And I've got to say, we didn't imagine how bad it was going to be. Nobody imagined how bad it was going to be. The demand is so high, it's unbelievable. At the moment, we're actually having more and more clients coming to us because they're just not coping. Schools, which is unbelievable, because before we never had the number of schools that were coming to us for support with families, because more and more families are accessing schools where they feel it's a safe haven. So coming to food banks as well, and I believe the criteria changes all the time, and sometimes we have no notice about the criteria changing at food banks. So some of the food banks we've spoken to, they will allow them to come 3 times, for example. Things happening at local authority level with the local welfare support service, again, they can only access their services once in 12 months. We appreciate the demand is so great, and we're all facing challenges, and the local authority is facing challenges, but so is the third sector. But the pressure falls back on the third sector. As Hannah alluded to earlier, we're fortunate enough to be a very strong network as becoming a Leeds Community Anchor Network leader and partner, that we're all working together collaboratively to try and provide the best for our communities. And I've got to say, I think, that it's just endless. It's whether it's food, whether it's fuel, whether it's clothing, utilities. We're trying to do the best we can in terms of using the services in the community, like we're using the CAB, using the Green Doctor, using Money Buddies, using an organisation called Help. We're trying to do the best we can. And again, as my colleague had alluded to earlier, the volunteers, without the volunteers and staff team going above and beyond the call of duty, we could not do what we're doing. And even out of hours, nobody gets paid to do out of hours work. We don't get funding for out of hours, but the number of calls that we're getting out of hours for people saying that just simply don't have enough money in their prepaid meters, or they don't have any food in the cupboard. And if it's something that they can't wait until the next day, then we have to step up to it. And we're just thankful to the team of staff and volunteers that have come together to try and do the best for their communities. And I think as a network, we've just become a lot stronger. I thank the local authority. We're working very much a lot better. You know, we're working in partnership, working with all the other third sector organisations. I'm just fearful of what's going to happen. None of us know what's going to happen come the 1st of April. The Household Support Fund has been a lifeline for many, but right now the demand is increasing more and more. And where other services can't help, the pressures come back on the third sector. I'm just hope that something can be done as of the 1st of April. And if there's any questions, please come back to me. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really valuable information that we've got from our third sector partners. I'd like to bring in our Department of Works and Pensions colleagues to give their perspective on Leeds.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So my name's Chris Joyce. I'm one of the senior leaders within DWP with responsibility across Leeds. And I've also got with me Gemma Sharrett, who's the senior partnership leader across Leeds. So, I mean, first of all, I just wanted to reflect on some of the comments that have been made by our colleagues, you know, across the table, really, and just say how you know, impressive it's been, how everybody's pulled together really for that one Leeds approach with that partnership working. It really has been a genuine team effort across the city since we've obviously had, you know, COVID and the cost of living crisis. So I want to say a big thank you, you know, to my colleagues for all the work that's been put into that, because, you know, we recognise it's, you know, that significant amounts of work have gone into that to support, you know, our customers and citizens. But then also I just wanted to you know, commend and pay tribute to, you know, our work coaches in our job centres who have a very challenging job and deal with some very difficult circumstances with our customers and citizens in trying to ensure that we get the right support to them and try and be, you know, compassionate in our delivery as well, ensuring that we're working with, you know, partners right across the board, right across the city, to ensure we've got that joined up approach. And essentially we're putting an arm around the customer, so it's very sort of customer centric really. I mean, in terms of our update from DWP, I'd just like to mention a couple of sort of national points, but then really get onto some of the stuff that we've been doing in Leeds, and then obviously happy, you know, to take any colleagues' questions. So in terms of the national picture, move to universal credit is the next stage of the rollout of universal credit, which is gradually replacing legacy benefits for people of working age. So DWP have been migrating legacy benefits across to UC in increasing numbers of job centre districts since April 2023, and by March 2024 migration will have started in every job centre district across the country. So through 2023 to 24, the focus is very much on households receiving tax credits only, so that's tax credits, child tax credits. And migration notices have begun to be issued to tax credits claimants living in Leeds from August 23. And I must stress this includes residents who are in receipt of tax credits and no other benefits at this point in time. So in 2024, just sort of moving into the future, migration notices will be issued to households that are receiving other combinations of the 6 means tested benefits that we currently have at the moment, the legacy benefits. So that will be job seekers allowance, income based, employment support allowance, income based, income support, incapacity benefit, housing benefit, etc. But it will exclude those on ESA only, an ESA with housing benefit. So I hope that gives you a flavour of the sort of natural picture in relation to move to universal credit. Just if we move to locally around Leeds, so we've been very busy with our estates activity. I think I gave the board an update last year when I was here. Eastgate Job Centre closed in March 2023, with colleagues and services moving to our other city centre job centre at Park Place, which reopened after significant refurbishment on the 20th of November 2023. So that's just reopened. And the reason for that refurbishment is because we had to essentially conduct significant building works, you know, to accommodate our colleagues in there from Eastgate. So whilst this was ongoing, we did have 3 temporary job centres open in Leeds that you might be aware of, which have either closed or are due to close. So Temple House in Seacroft, this closes on the 9th of December, but we've already decanted some colleagues out of there. Kirkstall Job Centre, the temporary one closed early this year, and the temporary job centre that we had on Albion Street in Leeds City Centre is due to close on the 9th of January. We have already discounted the majority of our colleagues into Park Place, but our health model office is retained in that temporary job centre until the 9th of January when it closes. And that's specific targeted help towards our health customers, working in conjunction with our partners across the city. So between April and November this year, over 505 employers attended recruitment events across Leeds job centres, which included Kirkgate Market whilst we were having Park Place refurbished. And they were offering opportunities for our customers to speak with employers to support them into employment. We've also got our established sector-based work academy programme, and we were successful with 712 customers starting a sector-based work academy programme, and over 700 of those had been able to gain work experience and a guaranteed job interview in their chosen field. Just in relation to the partnership working, an integral part of partnership working is wrapped around our social justice teams, which you might be familiar with. Now, the social justice teams are quite unique to West Yorkshire District. They actually started within Leeds, and the reason we decided to allocate resource to this locally was because we knew that there was a need for us to, you know, spend some time out in the community, working with our partners and providing that support for some of our most vulnerable customers with some of the most complex needs. So it gave us that time and that wraparound support in that multi-agency way, really, out in the community. And we've also been supporting the Afghan resettlement with that team recently, and they're also involved with the Refugee Council at the moment, providing support where we are able to there. We have also, in terms of specialism roles, youth employability work coaches that work alongside the social justice team in Leeds, and they're sort of mirroring the offer of that social justice team, but this is support that's specifically targeted at our youth across the city. We also have our Dewsbury Road Youth Hub as well, which is an outreach premises working with our partners to try and ensure we get that tailored support to the youth of the city, working in conjunction with our partners. In relation to the cost of living crisis, we have been promoting Money Information Centre via the promotional materials that we've received, and that's available in every Leeds job centre. We've been working with Better Leeds Communities to arrange a regular presence within the job centre there to ensure that we've got that partnership and provider working. And we've been upskilling our work coaches to ensure that they are aware of the welfare support that is available for all our customers whilst we've been going through the cost of living crisis. I mean, in terms of next steps for us in job centres, we're continuing to build on existing established relationships across the city, bringing in new partners, looking at innovative ways of working to try and reach customers that we perhaps perhaps don't attend job centres, maybe economically inactive. We might refer them to them as in sort of outreach settings, really, so we can really extend our offer of support to as many customers as we can. And that's it, unless you've got anything to add, Gemma.
No, I'm all right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure that's stimulated a lot of thought amongst our members. Can I have indications for questions, please? Councillor Harrington.
Okay, thank you very much to everybody that's presented this morning. It has been extremely interesting. My focus is on DWP stuff, actually. So it says in report that letters are going to be going out to people who need to transfer onto universal credit. Can you explain how that's going to be rolled out? Is it going to be sort of each DWP office sending out in a rotation, or is it just going to be blanket that everybody's going to get these? Because it would be helpful for ward members to know when those letters are going out, because I'm sure we'll be getting lots of questions that might come our way. And the other thing is, on the you talked about the academy, the job academy referrals and job fair attendance and things like that, and trying to reach people that you maybe normally wouldn't reach. Coming from the outer northeast of Leeds, I'm chair of the Outer Northeast Community Committee. Anybody in Wetherby, Harewood and bits of Old Woodley are going to have a bit of a struggle getting to a job centre if they don't drive, because the buses are shocking, and to get to Seacroft, which is the job centre that they have to go to. So I'm interested to know what facilities are going to be available on an outreach basis to actually reach people in those areas who cannot physically get to a job centre. And the job fairs and things like that, that's great, but they're all in the inner city. So there are one or two places that could be utilised in the outer northeast if some kind of outreach programme was available. Thank you.
Put the microphone on. So just to deal with those questions then. So in terms of the move to universal credit and the migration notices, it's not a big bang approach. So what we're trying to do is, roll that out nationally across different districts so that we're not sort of impacting everybody at the same time. Because what we want to do is, as we're doing it, we want to try and test and learn and then, try and scale that up. Now, for Leeds specifically, migration notices started going out in August 2023. So those migration notices will go out to customers within Leeds, and then what will happen next is they will have a 3-month window to apply for universal credit as part of that migration process. Does that answer that particular question?
Well, it does, but Leeds City Council covers a huge area. So the Leeds City, there are thousands of people who are going to be affected by that. And I'm just wondering, I mean, sort of the first week in January, are you going to send out 15,000 letters to people? Or are you going to break it down into each of those subgroups again to say that if you're on one of the benefits that's going to change over, those people are going to get them, and then in February it'll be the next group? That's what I'm trying to get at, so that we can be aware of that when people start getting those letters through the letterboxes. Sure. So I mean, the way the policy is designed is the letters are generated randomly, so it's impossible for me to sort of break down which ward or which particular area is going to get their letter when. I've just not got that information available to me. But obviously what we can do is we can work, very closely with our colleagues in the local authority so that we are on top of any teething issues. There is support available with regards to the letters, because there are helplines that are set up, and some of these are alluded to on gov.uk. There's a wealth of information in relation to the rollout of Move to Universal Credit on there. There is support available through our varying colleagues, and I think Help to Claim as well, to ensure that customers do get that
support in sort of claiming, putting that claim in.
Thank you, Councillor McCluskey.
Do you want me to answer the Seacroft? Yeah. So I mean, in terms of Seacroft Job Centre, when you say customers that don't get to the job centre or can't get to the job centre, are these existing universal credit customers you're referring to?
It's any claimant that needs to claim and actually go to a job centre to visit. And if there are people who are having these changes to universal credit, then and they don't drive, a lot of them won't be able to afford to run a car if they're claiming benefits anyway in our area because rents are so high, etc. So there are lots of issues, and my concern is that people in the outer areas do not have access to all of the things necessary that you spoke about without coming into the city. So all I'm saying is there a facility where you could bring some of that out to the outer area? We can advertise it. We can advertise it all over the place on social media, in surgeries and all kinds of things, as long as we know it was available, because I feel that they are being left out at the moment.
So it might be helpful if I explain how the sort of system's set up and devised. So
can I just check if that's going to be a very long explanation?
No, it will be a short explanation. I'll keep it brief. So our work coaches are actually recruited to work in job centres. That's the model. Now, what we've done in Leeds is we have top-sliced resource away from the job centres to put into the communities. Now, that's not funded. We don't get extra money for that. We've just decided to do that because we want to provide that support out in the communities. Now, what we can do, we can work closely with you if we think, well, actually, this area might need more support in that form you're talking about in the community. My colleague here, Gemma, can arrange that. But we've got to remember it is a finite amount of resource. We've got to kind of try and spread that around the city. So we're willing to work with you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McCluskey.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank you for the report. It was harrowing in places, the amount of work that's going on, and thank you for working in a collaborative way. That is the best way we can of going forward and tackling poverty and financial inclusion. I suppose the one question I would like to ask is how we're going to go ahead forward with this when it looks so much more daunting. So I can prove, but I know you can't answer that. But it's just you refer to poverty, the levels of poverty in Leeds, and it's 22% relative poverty for adults and 22% relative poverty. Do we know the percentages for absolute poverty? Thank you.
Yeah, we do. I don't have them off the top of my head, but we do have those. We do have them as all available. We use relative poverty because that's the measure that's most currently reflects prices of this time, whereas absolute poverty relates to prices back to 2011, and then they're inflation rated. So actually relative poverty is a more accurate description in terms of poverty statistics. We do have the absolute poverty statistics. They're on the Leeds Observatory, and we've got a poverty fact book with loads of data and statistics within there. So I'm really happy to share those whenever with you.
Councillor Rowntree, did you indicate?
I wasn't indicating.
I'll go to Councillor Actor then.
Just to pick up from Councillor Harrington's point with regards to even though I absolutely understand and I respect what you're saying with the outer part of the city where it's difficult for those to have an access, but even though I represent a centre and I feel that the residents that I represent will also have similar sort of issues trying to access the services. For example, and I've quoted this many times, that one of our local schools, there are primary school, there are 60 different languages have been spoken in that particular school. So it's such a diverse communities that we represent. But I feel for those who are on a lower income, and with this new universal credit issue is going to hit those communities really hard, especially single parents and so on and so forth. and I raised this question when Diane came last time from the Citizen Advice Bureau, where I feel there will be more need now than ever before for those community to have an access for an advice. Now, I absolutely understand and I respect you're just a messenger, but I feel, Chair, that we need to have some sort of minister of this government to have online conversation with us, because it is the doing of not yours and as an officer or a third sector. I think it's the government is trying to cause such a problem for those communities that we represent here in our city. And what we've heard from the third sector and all the things that we have done during the pandemic with the cultural food, which I absolutely salute the Leeds City Council for taking action immediately when we realize there are communities that we represent who obviously have different dietary requirements. So can I ask Diane, at the last time when I asked you at this very board that can we have an access to an email address specifically for elected members, those people who come to our surgeries and asking for advice, and when we refer them to the CAB, they always said it's difficult for them to have an access. It's difficult for our communities to have an access, but even worse when English is your second language, when those communities is newly arrived to this city, and obviously it's going to be difficult. I absolutely understand, Chair. I'm taking a lot of time, but I do have a passion for those people that we represent, and I think those people should be given a fairer service. Once again, respect yourself. It's not your doing. It's the government minister that we need to talk to.
Yes, I wasn't going to object to the time you were taking, Councillor Akhtar. I think you've been very eloquent in putting your point across. One thing I will point out is we don't have any sanction to bring a minister to give evidence to us. And anyway, I'm not sure how much use that would be, because they change so often these days. I'm not sure we'd be able to pin one down. But however, the issue that you raise, I know that you specifically directed it towards citizens' advice, but there is a more general issue in terms of a portal for elected member concerns on behalf of their residents to be taken forward for many organisations where GDPR, for instance, is an issue. And I think it's something that we can generally address. So I appreciate Diane might want to come back on that one herself, but I think it's something that we might also want to offer a more general response in terms of, you see, because previously we had Councillor Harrington and talking to the DWP, and DWP talked about schemes I've never heard of. I've never heard of a social justice team. Then you talk about the possibility for having more locally based responses from the DWP. I don't know anything about that. I don't know what portal you access to get the attention of the DWP. And I think it's something that could be developed and designed through perhaps Lee Helmsworth's section. Although you might tell me now, it's already there. So can you answer the general, what's the word? The general tension, concern around members not being able to take up the cases of their constituents effectively. And if Diane wishes to come in, I'm happy to do so. I wasn't blocking your response.
Yeah, I can come back on that, Chair. Interestingly, during COVID, so certainly through the community care hubs and the predecessor of the community anchor network, one of the key sort of learnings from that was that we did have a sort of top-down system where we could refer out to get support, but then it was like one of the big learning points was there was no then follow-up. How did organizations, how were they able to follow up with their customers to see what had happened? So that's actually started a process, a conversation about our ambition, and it is an ambition. We don't have it, and I don't, there's no commitment. It could take a long time to deliver. Is to have a sort of referral system that people can use that links in the organizations, and that we would maybe be able to track then, so organizations would be able to see who they'd referred, see where they were in terms of that commitment. I mean, that's a massive task. So that isn't just you could apply that to members, you could apply that to organizations, and it wouldn't just be a Leeds City Council thing, it would have to be a citywide thing. It's like a multi-agency referral system, if you want, for want of a better word, which I know we've talked about for many years without doing. So that in the context of the welfare system, that's certainly an ambition that we have. I'm happy to take away and look at the sort of member issues and asks around trying to join that up in a more coordinated way, as a sort of next step.
Thanks. I'm interested in understanding how an ambition turns into a priority. Do we have any perspectives from the voluntary sector in terms of how that might benefit them or how they might be involved in perhaps co-production?
Certainly be happy to pick up on a conversation outside the meeting about mechanics and details of that. Obviously, it always comes back to a resource issue, and time spent dealing with referrals is time that we're not able to allocate to dealing with direct inquiries from members of the public. So happy to follow it up.
Just to kind of add to that, we have had these conversations, and I suppose we're in a very reactive space at the minute, and that kind of proactive opportunity to kind of step back and think about some improvements that we could make in partnership. People are very pressed for time and resource at the minute. I mean, certainly from the perspective of the Leeds Community Anchor Network, obviously that is something that has grown and developed over the last couple of years. We've now got a lead community anchor in almost every part of the city, and where we don't have an organisation actually signed up, we've got some very good and strong partnerships there. I know that many elected members are already linked in or aware of their community anchor and that local ecosystem of groups and organisations. But if there's information that can be shared with elected members that's helpful, then we'd be happy to provide that.
Just a quick one, Chair, and I really welcome this. And very rightly, what you just said about the priority. I think comes April, it's going to be a difficult time for our residents in this city, and I'm sure nationally as well. But my concern is that people that I represent and my colleagues across the spectrum, that we want to do whatever we can to assist our communities in a way that they should not be sleeping in a cold weather when there is help and assistance available for them, and they should not be sleeping empty stomachs. And there are kids. We are doing what we can as a local authority, and I think sometimes those low income workers, where they have been relying on the tax credit or child credit or whatever now into the universal credit, they will need advice, and that's all I am asking. And I'm pleased that you're saying yes, but I do not want to wait for the next year when you come back again and we have not addressed this particular issue. I know this is only a recommendation board, and we've got the exec member here as well. So I'm only urging all of you to please listen to this and do what we can, because when people come to our surgeries, we want a somewhere where we can feed the information into, and that particular family gets the assistance and help. That's all why I'm asking, and I'm sure I'm speaking on behalf of 99 elected members in this city.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Let's go to Councillor Anderson.
Just some comments and some questions. But first of all, can I thank you for the work that you are doing? I think that should be clearly stated. The work that you are doing. Now that said, statistics and information. Where is the information to show how many people you are actually dealing with and actually added value to, and the amount of money that you've been able to generate into the community? The reason for asking that question is there's no point in us sitting here saying, great, you're doing a great job. But if you're not reaching the right people and you're not actually adding value, I would have to ask, should we not be looking at where the money could be, the resources? So if one of you was more efficient than the other, maybe the council need to start prioritising giving you more money and less to the ones that are not, because so that we're targeting it effectively. So that's that one. And also it'd be interesting to know how many people you are no longer needing to help because you've taken them through the journey. You've now got the energy improvements, you've got the prepaid meter taken out, etc., which hopefully is adding to their quality of life now. So that's on that side. The information that was asked for earlier on, is that going to be included in the social progress index in terms of the amounts of in absolute poverty? Is that going to be one of the measures that's going to be the people at the pack probably haven't a clue what the devil I'm talking about, but this is aimed at the council officers with our inclusive strategy, where we can at the moment get a page that shows the number of statistics for each ward and you can compare it with other wards. Is the level of poverty going to be one of those measures that can be accessed via that, so that we can then look at comparator wards to see how good, bad or indifferent we are? And in terms of Councillor Harrington's point, you'll then be able to identify whether or not there is an absolute number in a particular ward, which could then justify why you have to do a more localized service. But if, however, the number of people who are relatively unemployed isn't great, then it's a bit much sending someone out if you're only going to be seeing 20 people, because that's how many there is. And I talk from a ward, Adam Wharfdale, who is lucky in that we don't have a lot of those issues, right? So I'm being honest in saying that if you put somebody permanently in my ward, they would be sitting sometimes not doing anything, to be honest. And so let's make sure we get the resources in the right place. But the other thing, two other things. One is, if I've understood your budget proposals that came out yesterday, you're actually going to potentially be closing some of the hubs or opening them later. Now, we heard that one of the voluntary bodies was saying that they don't have enough hours and don't have enough time. Is there any risk that by not having some of those units open, we're going to be missing people, or have you already analysed that down to show that there isn't actually many people coming at those times? Because I'm not saying that it's wrong. By the way, I'm not actually saying it's wrong. I'm just asking, have you actually worked out that people don't need access to that service at that time? And the final thing is, in paragraph 61, do you mean housing Leeds as in council tenants, or housing Leeds as in housing in general, in terms of that paragraph?
Oh, where to start? So I think there were several questions in there, one directed to the voluntary sector, one directed to DWP potentially, and another one towards our council officers. But I'll start with the voluntary sector. Over to you,
can I come in at that one?
Yes, please.
So in terms of reporting back the numbers, so if we base it on the household support fund that we're receiving from the Cultural Food Hub, we've already shown that the cost of food has actually increased, if not doubled, trebled. And to be honest with you, we have to feed back the numbers in terms of monitoring the number of clients that are accessing our services and the number of food packs that we're having to distribute as well. And to be honest with you, if we were reliant upon the household support fund alone, we would not be able to do what we're doing. So we have to look at the sources of funding, and that's exactly what we're doing. The cost of food has gone up, and we put it in black and white. So families are asking for other things like fresh produce, meat, vegetables, fruit. If we did not access other sort of pots of funding, we'd not be able to provide those, and we are providing those. So we have to feed this back regularly to the Leeds Food Aid Network, back to people like Lee Hemsworth. With the help of Healthy Holidays, I've got to say that's been a big advantage, because families who access Healthy Holidays services are actually eligible for a Healthy Holiday food pack. So those are extra sources that we're providing on top of what we're giving them through the Cultural Food Hub. And to be honest with you, if those things disappear, and if we did not get the extra support from the other charities, the other grants that we're getting, we would not be able to deliver what we're doing.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, as I kind of alluded to earlier, I think the approach that Leeds has taken specifically around the Household Support Fund is very different. And it is quite a multi-layered approach. So obviously there's a lot of that money that gets directly out to people, directly into their pockets through the local authority. The work with the third sector really does acknowledge that there are people out in the city who would much prefer to approach a third sector organisation that's rooted in the community, who they have trust in order to seek that practical support. I would say as well, and hopefully it's come across in this morning's presentations, that in terms of collaboration and joint working across the third sector with the local authority, I think that has, over the last couple of years, we've come on absolute leaps and bounds around that. So I think there are very honest conversations that go on within the third sector about who's best placed to make best use of the investment that we have available to us. But I would say, obviously, it's a very challenging environment that we all find ourselves in. So we have numerous conversations, both within the third sector and with our local authority colleagues, where there is an acknowledgement that, particularly around the Household Support Fund, it's incredibly valuable. But we've all used the phrase, it's a drop in the ocean. But in terms of not having clarity around the Household Support Fund from the 1st of April next year, that is a real concern. But just finally, from a voluntary sector perspective, as Rifat's already alluded to, voluntary sector groups and organisations are adept at bringing in funding from other sources to supplement the work that's happening and complement the funding from statutory partners such as the local authority.
Do you want my 2 pennies worth as well? Do you want my 2 pennies worth on this? Okay. Just to say that we are part of the voluntary sector as well. We are a local charity. We're not a statutory service. We don't get statutory. We're a local charity, the same as other members of the voluntary sector. So I think that does. A lot of people assume Citizens Advice kind of gets magical national funding, which we absolutely don't. I've been submitting quarterly reports to the council for the last 20 years. So if you want any data about our service, there's plenty there. A lot of it is included in the report that's been submitted to this meeting. Council officers tell me that the data and the detail that we provide is like exponentially more than they get from anyone else. So we can certainly evidence all that we do, and we're happy to do that. We're totally transparent about that. In terms of the results, I think an example is in the paper that over a year that we've generated at least £3 million in additional income for the clients that we've helped, which again is often helping people to claim appeal benefits decisions where they've been deprived of income, and we've helped them. That can result in £10,000 backdated payments. Significant sums of money are involved. So I think we can evidence that we do make a very significant and real difference. In terms of the kind of ongoing impacts, it's very difficult. We talk about the majority of our debt advice clients, for example, have what are euphemistically called negative budgets. To my mind, that means if your income is less than your outgoings, at the end of every week, you are poorer than you were at the beginning of the week. And that is happening week after week and month after month. So even with our help and advice, we are not the ones that can solve that long-term grinding poverty when people's benefits are at historically low levels that are inadequate to meet their daily living costs. Joseph Rowntree Trust and Trust of Trust have got a campaign at the moment which is pointing out universal credit does not meet the minimum standard of income that somebody needs just to survive. And actually, I think it's at least 50% of universal credit claimants are having deductions made from their universal credit to repay their advance payment of universal credit to cover that 5-week waiting period, and also energy bills and other debts that they have where those payments can be deducted directly from their benefits. So when people are living in that kind of grinding poverty, I'm afraid we are not the ones with the long-term solutions to that. That's national policy decisions are the only way to resolve those issues.
Okay. Lee, is it paragraph 61 you were after, Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, they are housing Leeds. Sorry, they're housing Leeds tenants. Yes. Yes. Can I just on the social progress index? I don't know the detail, but there are poverty indicators in there, so I can take that away and I'll get some broader information for you. Just on the hubs one, I mean, that's a budget proposal to exec board next week. I think there's a working group here next week, so we'll probably pick it there. But just for clarity, we do that full needs assessment, so that's going on now. Anyway, on those, and just on I think you mentioned, Councillor Anderson, at the beginning when you were saying about, you know, the numbers supported and whether we should focus on those who support more. I think certainly if you take our approach, what my view is in terms of household support fund, if you look at that, that's generally sort of broadly split two ways. There's half of it is like a direct payment to those who are most vulnerable at the council, you know, that goes. The rest we give to those organisations, including our third sector colleagues, that I think local people probably trust more, if I'm honest, and will go to them rather than maybe come into the local authority. So I take the point about, you know, targeting those where they get the most out. But actually, if we didn't give it to certain groups, we probably wouldn't even be helping those people because they don't trust. So there is a trust element in that funding as well. And I think it's important that, but that's a personal point of view, that we continue to do that.
Is you've only got a certain size of a cake, and it, you know, it can only go as far as you've used the cake up. And what I was asking is to make sure that you're maximising the return. I'm not accusing anybody in here of not working and not doing the best we can. It was just, do we challenge on a best value when we're getting things through? Knowing you probably do, but I just wanted to get it in the public domain, that's all.
And did you have a query for DWP in your questions, Councillor Anderson?
Well, just how we yeah, it's all right saying if you send a generalist out, fine, that'll cover everything. But sometimes you might need a specialist who helps in long-term unemployment. You might need someone who is better at giving benefits advice, because not everybody knows absolutely everything about everything. That's the point I was making.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, Councillor Anderson. So one of the things we have been doing is a piece of work to, you know, look at our place-based approach, specifically down to, you know, ward areas and what are the challenges in those particular wards, because each ward has, you know, different challenges, as you're more than aware. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to work with different stakeholders to get a better understanding of those challenges, but get the right specialism into those areas, utilising the community work coaches. Now, what I would say is that's a finite resource, because we have to effectively steal that from our existing work coach pot that's in job centres. But you're absolutely right. It's a constant review, you know, with stakeholders, looking at our evidence to understand what the
Can I
challenges
just clarify how many community workers you have?
So how many is it in Leeds, Gemma, at the moment?
We've got 6 at the minute.
So they'll have to spread very thinly between 33 wards. Okay.
Absolutely. So it is a challenge, you know, admittedly, but we've got to try and work. It gets back to your cake analogy, Councillor Anderson. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Stables, you've been waiting very patiently.
Thank you very much, Chair. As a new member of elected member, I found it very difficult to know where to go to, and it's actually following on from your point. I found it incredibly difficult to get to be able to help those in real need quickly, because I've not known where to go to. And I'll give you an example of that. So although I represent Wetherby Ward, which is seen as a really, you know, an affluent area, there are real pockets of deprivation there, hidden pockets that people aren't aware of. And in Boston Spa, for example, there is an estate which is houses that were built for munitions workers as a temporary fix in during the war, during the Second World War, that long ago. And they're still there, and there's people still living in them. And they have almost zero insulation. So I guess over the years they've coped, but now with the cost of living crisis and the cost of energy, so many of them are really struggling. And so I've kind of been going around the houses on this, talking to lots of different people and not really got anywhere. And, there's someone who is disabled. She has multiple health issues and she's got damp and mold in the house. She's constantly cold. And I feel a complete loss of, how to help her. And I still don't know the answer because it keeps going back and forth and nothing actually happens. And this is 4-5 months later. And you just feel helpless. And it gets back to that point of, wouldn't it be great if there was a portal that somehow we managed to get through to the right people quickly to help people in real distress? So I don't know if anyone can respond to that.
I think the fashionable term is triage. That's used a lot in the council at the moment. Before you do come back again, sorry, Hannah.
Yeah, just really briefly from a community anchor network perspective, the community anchor for Wetherby is Wetherby in support of the elderly. So they're in receipt of household support fund and they're working with their local groups and organisations in terms of ensuring that funding and support gets out to people within the community. So if you weren't aware of their role, hopefully that's helpful.
Okay, I'll just briefly come back on that. I'm very aware of WISE, but I certainly don't see them in that role. I wasn't aware of that role. They do a lot in the community, but if someone's got issues heating their home or with insulation or with damp, I wouldn't have thought, is that right? They can help?
They are one of our kind of newer community anchors, but they are playing that role through Household Support Fund. So many of the anchors are working with organisations like Green Doctor and making referrals to Green Doctor so that not only can anchors support in terms of perhaps giving a fuel voucher for kind of the immediate term, that they can actually link them in with sources of support that can help their situation kind of for the longer term.
Thank you very much. I will give that a try.
Councillor Tudor.
Thank you. And thanks for all your reports. I suppose one point for Councillor Stables is that I found is I've just built up my own document over time and that I refer to what works and what doesn't and the ins and outs of that. But two other things. Just to highlight, in Seacroft, we have this wonderful thing called the Seacroft Pantry, which we don't shout about and probably shouldn't be saying it here, because it's a wonderful thing where customers pay something like £3.50 a week and get about 20 quid's worth of stuff. It's a really nice model. It's a subsidised supermarket, really. It works really well. It just works really well. Going all the way back to Councillor Harrington's thing about job centres and access. So it's a DWP question. As you mentioned, Seacroft Job Centre, which we understood was temporary, closing on Saturday. But within all this talk about huge budget, household budget pressures, how often are your customers, are they going to be expected now to go to Park Place? And I don't know how often, if they're expected to go once or twice a week, that might be £15-20 a month on their budget. So that was my question. And perhaps people coming from as far as Wetherby, are we adding significant cost, or is some of it done on the telephone, that sort of thing? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the question. So the job centre that's closing in Seacroft, the temporary one, that's Temple House. There will remain the permanent job centre in Seacroft, that will remain there. So there were two job centres in Seacroft. I mean, with regards to where customers go, the way the model's set up is that all customers are geographically aligned to their nearest job centre. That's how we work the model. Now, if there are issues around travelling and customers would have a preference over a different job centre, then of course we're more we are sort of in a position where we would look at that, of course.
Thank you.
That sounds like an area that needs some work doing to it in terms of geography and access.
Yeah, just in what respect, just for clarification?
Well, it's that taking into account the ability of people and the modes of transport which are available to them, and their geographical association, because it should be not as the crow flies, but as the claimant travels, if you see what I mean.
I absolutely do. So there was a significant mapping exercise that was undertaken when claimants were geographically linked to job centres, and some of that was based around, you know, public transport links of what does that you know, look like. I think there are going to be instances where that doesn't, you know, perfectly sit for everybody. So where we do have those, you know, instances, we're more than happy to, you know, take a look at those individual cases and see, you know, what we can do to be more accommodating. But ultimately, we only have, you know, so many sites, and we've got to service, you know, the customers in the communities utilising those sites that are available to us.
Councillor Siri with our last question.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one about the welcome spaces. Do we actually actively go out and find new spaces? Because in Pudsey we've got 3 very close together, but then in the outer areas where it's probably needed, there isn't any. I just wondered how we went about finding, you know, venues. Thank you.
Yeah, I can pick that one up. So obviously we had the programme last year. And so this year we put out an expression of interest for groups and organisations to come forward who are interested in hosting a welcome space, need to get the terminology right. And what we then did was, by ward area, those expressions of interest were passed across to the relevant community anchor in order to convene a grant panel to review, to look at the coordination and the distribution of those in terms of opening hours across the week, etc. There is still some funding available, so that if there are cold spots across the city that community anchors or others identify, and there are groups or organisations who may be in a position to offer a welcome space in those areas, then there is still some funding that is left available. So, you know, the programme is now up and running, and spaces are listed on the Leeds directory, but it could be that more come on board, you know, in the case that you've outlined.
Do we direct that to then, that information?
So you could either talk to us at Val, so I can pass my details through, or the details of members of the team who deal with this, or for Pudsey, it's the Pudsey Community Project, who are your community anchor, and I'm sure would be really happy to work with you to look at the spread of provision across your ward.
Thank you very much. That was a very useful discussion. One of the suggestions that we did have coming out of the agenda was there was a reference to the Poverty Truth, which have produced several Poverty Truth commissions. However, I'm only aware of the first of them. And it was a very interesting area for us to perhaps catch up on in terms of understanding what recommendations are made at each of these commissions, and where those recommendations go. So at a future meeting, it would be really useful to have an update on that concept, because I think lived experience speaks volumes, and if we're not hearing it, then we can't influence policy within the council. So, Councillor Harland, do you want to come in very quickly on that, do you?
Yeah, just to say I will be going on the next Poverty Truth Commission in January, from January, so I can bring that back. And I did indicate to speak earlier to come to the defence of our partners, but I think they've done that very well themselves. Thank you very much.
I concur. I also note that we're well over our schedule in terms of the agenda items for today and discussion time. But of course, this is a very essential area for us to make sure that we're all getting as better an understanding as possible for the profile of it in Leeds. And I really appreciate the guests that we had here today to offer much valued testimony of their own from the people that they're helping in reality. So thank you very much for that. And we're going to move on to the next item. I beg your pardon, you indicated
Sorry, I did. I thought it was the end of the meeting, but I was just going to basically say that it'd be a pleasure to welcome all the councillors to our services, come and visit us. Mary Harland did come and visit our service. She got a good view and an insight into what we do and actually meeting the clients. And I think when we sit here as a third sector, we want you to share the same vision that we see and meet the clients and actually see what goes on. You'll get a really good insight. So we welcome all the councillors to come along to our services.
Can I just add, I got an awesome chicken tikka masala too.
Cooked by me, by the way. It wasn't shop bought.
Well, I think you've sold it there between you. Thank you very much for attending. You can sit and listen to the rest of the agenda if you wish, but I know you've all got very busy jobs to get on with. Right, so the next item is the Welfare Support Scheme update, which is being introduced by Councillor Harland. I'm assuming this will take a little bit less time than the last item.
Again, thank you, Chair. I'm assuming that the papers have been read. Just to say before Liam speaks, just to say that I'm very, very pleased that Leeds keep the local welfare support fund, which we don't have to do. I'll let Lee go into a little bit more depth of the change of criteria, etc., that the changes we've made over the past year. But it is an excellent scheme. But I think Councillor Anderson mentioned the size of cake and how we distribute it. We're just hoping that we're going to get some more cake come April.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Harland. So Dave will introduce himself, or he'll do the go through the report because it's his report. But yeah, we brought a report last year on the LWSS, so this is an update report. Because of some of the issues we've just been talking about, we've had to take some difficult decisions on that this year. But I'll pass over to Dave, who can talk about that.
Thank you, Lee. My name is David Fryer. I manage the Welfare and Benefits Service, and we administer housing benefit, council tax support, discretionary housing payments, and more recently, local welfare support. If I may, I'll just briefly draw your attention to some of the key points within the report. Local welfare support, or the local welfare support scheme, is intended to provide short-term assistance to households who are suffering a financial crisis. Last year, in response to the cost of living crisis, the criteria for receiving an award was relaxed to try and support as many households as possible. These changes saw the local welfare support scheme transform from a scheme designed to support relatively small numbers of households facing a crisis to a fund more widely available to lower income households. And that presented a subsequent financial pressure to the council on the scheme. Now, the annual base budget for the local welfare support scheme is £600,000. This year, the scheme received an additional £1.5 million from the Household Support Fund, taking the total budget to £2.1 million. Now, the total spend on awards during April and May was approximately half of the budget. So it was quite clear that something needed to be done quite quickly. And forecasts showed that if we'd have left things as they were, we'd overspend by approximately £3.1 million. So in response to that financial pressure, a review was undertaken with the principal objective to ensure the scheme remained within budget so that support could continue to be provided across the full financial year. Now, the review concluded that the scheme would continue to provide support with food and fuel, white goods, furniture, flooring and removals, but within the remit of a revised criteria, which we implemented during August. Full details of the criteria are outlined within the report, and they've been published online as well. In summary, applicants are now only eligible for support if they have no savings, are in receipt of or applying for an eligible benefit, and are in a predefined crisis situation. And furthermore, as was referenced earlier, applicants are now restricted to one award per year. Now, exceptions can be made to that criteria where someone presents themselves as being in exceptional circumstances. So there is some flexibility still. And there is a clear dispute process for applicants who were not successful. And I think a key thing really here is that unsuccessful applicants are always referred to appropriate alternative support across the city, which we've heard a bit about this morning, meaning that every applicant to the local welfare support scheme still receives an element of support, whether that be a direct financial award or advice or signposting to another organisation. So following the review, additional measures were also introduced to help prevent fraud, improve consistency in decision making, and to overall ensure that financial help is given to those households who need it the most. So in terms of the impact and the future of the scheme, the measures introduced have been successful in terms of reducing expenditure, and the scheme is now forecast to remain within budget this year. The current criteria will also, perhaps crucially, enable the scheme to remain within its £600,000 base budget next year, which is important given the uncertainty around the Household Support Fund, which was referenced earlier. The Local Welfare Support Scheme continues to provide support to households across the city who are in crisis, although clearly on a smaller scale. With an average of 65 households per month receiving support, totaling around £33,000. So that's each month. Of course, we'll keep the scheme and its criteria under review, and we'll continue to look at improvements where we can. We do consult with service users and partner organisations with the aim of ensuring that we meet the ongoing needs of residents who are suffering crisis and hardship in the city, but at the same time achieving best value and crucially remaining within budget. So I'd welcome any comments or questions from the board. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from members? Councillor Rowntree.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report. It's Dave, isn't it? Yeah, well, thanks very much, Dave, and well done, especially in your efforts to bring things down within the available budget. I think that must have been an enormous challenge, and I'm sure that the sort of increased expenditure previously was going to deserving causes, which would no doubt have made it difficult to do. I just wonder, could you tell us a bit about the sort of your channels with your communication channels with your clients? Would you normally meet everyone face to face, or would it be done on phone, by telephone?
Yeah, it's a good question. So at the moment, the primary access route to local welfare support is over the telephone. So the people who answer those calls have recently received additional training so that they can better signpost people to alternative support provision across the city. So they're primarily coming through telephone at the minute. We are working towards an online claim form, which should be available before the end of the financial year, which will mean that people can apply, outside office hours kind of thing. And we do tend to speak to residents through member referrals and referrals from third sector organisations and that kind of thing. So it's varied, but primarily it's telephone at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Just to follow up on that, with the conversations that you have, I mean, as you said, you're not able to help everyone, and clearly you're not able to help as many people now as you were 12 months ago. Would you sort of aim to, if you can convey this within a conversation, you would always assume aim to finish up with signposting some alternatives and different sources of support. Yeah, that would sort of be normal and universal practice.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson.
Just briefly, to reiterate the comments there, you've had difficult decisions to make, and you've shown that you've got the you-know-whats to actually make those decisions to better, so that it's been targeted, I think, in a more effective way. My question is, in paragraph 11, bullet point 5, you've said protecting public funds, verification, cross-checks to prevent fraudulent applications. Is fraud a problem or not? I know you've referenced it, but it might only be 1% for all I know. I mean, but just purely because you've mentioned it, is it a problem or not?
I think, I mean, I've had 20 years experience in administering housing benefit council tax support, and fraud happens. It's not common, but I think when we're dealing with public funds, we've got a duty to make sure that we protect those public funds. So we've introduced measures to prevent fraud. I would, in answer to your question, I don't think fraud is prevalent within the local welfare support scheme, but we need to put measures in place to make sure that it can't happen.
Any further questions? Councillor Tudor.
Dave, you sound like a person who might know the answer to this, which is, I don't understand, and if perhaps to put into layman's terms for me, benefits have increased with inflation 6.4% in recently. Local housing allowance rates back up to the 30th percentile of local rent level. Are you able to put that into more basic terms for me, please, at all?
I could try, but I think, I mean, with the local housing allowance rates, as I think people probably know, they've been frozen for a number of years, several years now. So what that will mean to people who are in receipt of housing benefit or universal credit is that they will see an increase in their weekly benefit payments to cover their rent charges. So hopefully the impact will be that it will make their rent slightly more affordable to them. In reality, landlords could potentially increase the rents in line with those increases. So I suppose we get to see the announcements in terms of what the LHA rates are going to be for next year. I think they're being released in January. So at this time, I don't quite know what it will mean, you know, in pounds in the pocket kind of thing. I'm sorry, was there another element to the question?
So I realise I'm putting you on the spot, and we might need to come back to it. But what the 30th percentile bit was all about?
Sorry, yeah, right. The 30th percentile refers to the bottom 30% of the rental market. So essentially, what the aim is of lining the LHA rate up with that 30th percentile is that it opens that bottom 30% of the rental market up to people who are in receipt of benefits. That's how it's intended to work.
And is that all rents of all types of property, not just council and housing association property?
That's right, yes, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Seary.
Thank you. Just a quick one on page 34.20. You say low uptake of vouchers were reported across the various schemes. Have we taken any learning from there of how we're going to engage better next time if, you know, try and improve uptake on these vouchers, fuel vouchers, I'm presuming? 34? Am I on the...
A different report.
Am I on a different report? Sorry about that. No, page 34. Sorry, I'm on a...
Later on.
I've moved on. Sorry about that. Apologies.
No worries. But while you're there, answer the question. It was on the previous item, but it was to do with vouchers and take up.
Yeah, it was just about it mentions that there were a low uptake on vouchers, and I wondered if we had any learning from there of how we could try and improve communication or engagement.
I know. Sorry, unless you're going to go on that, I could try. I'll try and answer your question. I think the local welfare support scheme does offer vouchers. we offer supermarket vouchers in addition to cash awards. There is significant uptake just purely because of the need, the demand for support. We offer vouchers for most of the main supermarkets. So Lee wants to come in.
I think this is in reference to the national schemes. So there were a number of sort of alternative funding schemes. So if you remember last year, everybody got a contribution to their utility bills. I think it was £400 or something like that. For people who weren't on gas and electric, so people who were on oil or were on, there were certain like non-grid properties, there was an alternative provision where they were given a voucher. So it was a national scheme, it was cascaded nationally. Locally, we had a part of a role in it, but only in sort of filling in the details for people. But there was a really low take up of that. So we did what we could locally in terms of promoting it and promoting the scheme and telling people about it through our channels, social media, etc. But nationally, there was a low take up of those. And I would hope if they did it again, they would do it more locally than nationally, which is, I think, what the problem was.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Hannan.
Thank you very much. Page 4 under white goods, point 3. It looks like you've got a partnership with a local domestic appliance manufacturer. That is welcoming news that they're going to give between 100 and 200 fridge freezers that are potentially refurbished goods. Any reason why you've left the name out of the manufacturer?
No particular reason. The manufacturer is Hisense.
And these 100 and 200 fridges, I understand that they're going to be refurbished and they're not new.
That's correct. They're fully refurbished and they come with a guarantee in terms of the quality.
Any further questions? Very good. Well, thank you for coming to update us on that. Do members wish to see a further update next year? Very good. I think that's a vote of endorsement in your assiduous work. Thank you very much for coming. On to our next item. I will invite Liz Jarman and Paul Money to come forward and provide an update on our community committee review. Councillor Harland, do you want to introduce, or are you going to leave it to your officers?
I'll just say a few words, Councillor Galton. I know we're pressed for time. Just really to say thank you to those members that have already been involved in our 2 workshops, and we've now had 2 working groups since we started this journey. We've had really positive feedback from members across the political divide, across the city, and it's really appreciated the input that you've all done, but I'll leave the body of the report to the officers.
Thanks, Councillor Harland, and thanks, Chair. Paul Money, Chief Officer in the Safer, Stronger Communities team. Just to detail, I think, some of the key highlights in this update report. Members will be aware that community committees were established some time ago, back in 2014. And again, members will appreciate the significant role that they play and that the mechanism through which the community committees operate in terms of supporting local people and local communities. The review essentially aims to listen to the views, principally the views of local ward members, but we're also very keen to engage with local communities as well, and take feedback about how we can improve the way in which those committees operate. There's some great work done in those committees, but there's probably some opportunities around standardising approaches that particularly work well, and some other opportunities that we think can be exploited. And certainly the 2 workshops that have been held to date have provided, I think, plenty food for thought, actually, in terms of some opportunities that we can take forward. As Councillor Harland has said, I think it is really important through this board to acknowledge the significant contribution members have provided already. Up to this point, bearing in mind we started this work back towards the back end of the summer. So if we can continue with that level of engagement, I'm sure those significant opportunities will be realised. There's a fairly tight timescale that we're working to in terms of this review, but we have had conversations about the value of the work, and the work needs to be done thoroughly. And so there are some opportunities around ensuring that those timescales and that chronology is flexible enough to ensure that we get the benefit from the review. That said, 2 workshops have been undertaken to date, and 2 more are planned for, I think it's early in the new year, Liz, unless I'm mistaken. And we're cautiously pleased, really, with how things have progressed to date. I'll leave it there, Chair, if that's okay for now. Pick up any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson.
2 comments. One is, if we can try and, I've had problems because you've been organising meetings at the same times as other meetings. I've been in the council diary, not my diary. This is ones that have been in, so if we can get that right, because I wasn't able to attend the last meeting. I do take seriously when I'm representing everybody here, that I wasn't able to attend. But the more important point was, we went to a delegated budgets workshop on the 15th of November. Then since then, I get the budget papers telling me that you're going to cut back by 15% the wellbeing funding. You are going to be removing, well, not you personally, housing are going to be removing the money for the HAPs, which was one area that we were looking to do. So we've now got a gap. Now, I've not looked and seen whether there's any effect on the Youth Activity Fund or not, but that's the 2 that I'm aware of. So how are we going to work together again to look to see, because there's, irrespective of the good work that was done at that delegated, we've now got a smaller cake. I'm on cakes today. You've now got a smaller size cake to deal with in terms of what we can do in our community committees. How are we going to deal with, and I understand the pressures, and I'm not criticising you for what the decisions you've made. You've had to make decisions. But how are we going to work together to make community committees worthwhile? Because if we've got less money, there's not a lot we can actually do.
Liz Jarmin, Head of Community Locality Partnerships. We've had to make some difficult proposals, as others have done. I think that there is some opportunities though. We did an exercise earlier this year to look at the combined wealth of the committees, and with all the funds that are delegated, it was over £5 million that are actually sitting in the budget. So I think there's some work we can do around looking at how we can use some of that funding more flexibly. So we're in discussions about how we might be able to use SIL, notwithstanding that not all committees get that funding. But I think there is some opportunity to look at how we can use the budgets that are already sitting, some of which has been sitting there for some time, I should add, much more effectively and much more flexibly. So that's what we'd like to work with members around that.
Councillor McCluskey.
As a relatively new member and been one of the champions for health and social care, one of my concerns about the community committees is the lack of public engagement and how do we improve that? Because it really is a representative of that community.
I think that is really widely recognised, but I think we also recognise that engagement happens differently in all the different committees. Some it is about representation and people coming to the meetings. In other committee areas, it works in different ways. So our next workshop is around that community engagement and empowerment role. Not only just about, but that's not just necessarily about how we get more people to the meetings, but how do we want to engage? What does effective engagement mean and look like in different areas? So we want to listen to you about what those ideas might be. And I think at the working group, we talked about some principles that we'd almost be able to share with committees, and a toolbox of different engagement methods that could be employed by different committees, dependent how that engagement might work best with your communities and the people that you represent. So I think there's lots of opportunity around that, but we do recognise that engagement does look different in different areas.
Thank you. I found the first one on champions really, really useful as a new member. Thank you.
Councillor Siri.
Yeah, just a quick one to follow up on Councillor Kluski's. Obviously, you see different community committees, and they are at different times and different numbers. It'd be useful to know, because obviously we don't really get many people turning up on ours, and ours are during the day. So it'd be really useful, yeah, to see how that works.
I think that's the theme that's coming out of all of the workshops so far. The members coming together and talking to one another in a different committee members that have perhaps not talked to one another and shared some of that information, and people from different groups and things like that. So, I mean, one of the things that we are thinking about is maybe having some sort of annual event where we bring all the committees together to share some of that good practice, because the one thing that we've not been short of is feedback, and you've all got lots of opinions, so that's really great. It's been amazing listening to those opinions. We want that sort of spirit of sharing and spirit of learning from one another to continue. So we are looking at, one of our recommendations may well be around having some sort of community committee summit every year, where we bring you all together and share some of that work and look at how, what works well could maybe work in other places. So definitely we'd want to look at how we continue some of that sharing, Councillor Siri.
Councillor Rowntree.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was actually on the same table as Councillor Anderson in the workshop on finance, and I see that in your report you seem to have incorporated quite a bit of the stuff that we were talking about, which is pleasing. I certainly got a strong sense from that and the other workshop that I attended, of the diversity of practice across community committees. And I'm wondering if one of the outputs of the review perhaps could be like some statements of good practice, without being totally prescriptive, a sort of sense of we know this works, and we think this we encourage you to sort of consider working this way, particularly in the financial area. I know we spent a bit of time talking about the importance of members setting priorities and taking a view independently of individual cases of how we wanted funds to be spent over the year. I do like the notion of a annual summit. I think that's excellent. That would be very helpful for an exchange of ideas. There's one thing I would like to put to you, and depending on the answer that I get, may or may not ever raise this again, but it's within the lifetime of this review, certainly. But it has occurred to me, and I've put this to a few people, that in the sort of course of the discussion, we're talking about functions of community committees. It seems that the notion of, are the borders of community committees in the right place, is out of scope for this review. I don't know. Am I the only person who's taking an interest in this? I'm just wondering if it is just me, or if there is any sense that maybe borders should be drawn in different places. I apologise if my mic is playing up. I seem to be dropping in and out.
I think there's a general interest in terms of maximising coterminosity with how our partners divide their Leeds map up, such as health and police.
I would say in the scope of this review, this initial review, that we aren't looking at changes in geography at this moment in time, but I think that it's a fair comment that's made by the chair that there is, you know, the Leeds landscape in terms of the different partners and organisations is complex, and if we can find some way of rationalising it and helping us all to work better together, then that would be something that we would want to look at, but not in the context of this current review, which is mostly about listening to members and how they would like to see the committees working and being shaped in the future.
Thank you. That's helpful. I think you mentioned health and police, didn't you, Chair? Yeah. Parliamentary boundaries are also a factor, and as we know, they're due to change. Well, but they will change at the end of the current Parliament. But yeah, okay. Thanks for that answer.
Councillor Actor.
Not sure if I've raised this at the last review meeting, but I was just thinking, and with regards to who have raised about the turnout in the meetings, how about the forums? Can't we go back many years ago where we used to have forums? For example, we used to have like London Forum and then a Hyde Park Forum within links with the community committees. And in fact, before the community committees, those who remember CIT's community involvement teams, because I feel that the community committees are one of the main crucial player of this authority to bring the communities together. This is the only platform that we give ordinary man and a woman that we represent to have their voice within the council. So will there be, I mean, I understand with the budget pressure and the rest, but I think having even every 3 months a forum within your own ward, because all the community committees, they rotate, don't they, from one ward to another, but each ward has a different issues, and that could be the reason we don't see many people showing interest. People will only come to your meetings when there is an issue, when they have a particular theme or issue, antisocial behavior, closure of a school, whatever it is, they will come to those meetings. And I think we need to encourage our communities to come to these meetings so we can listen to their views.
I think that has actually come up, that issue, particularly around engagement and the fact that many of the committees like to rove around the committee area, that you're not going to get a person from a ward in one area necessarily coming to a ward where, you know, they might have to get 2 buses to go to, or whatever it might be. So whether or not we do make sure that the discussion pieces in those meetings are more relevant to that local community, but without wanting to second guess what members want, this is another issue that we'll be discussing at the community engagement workshop that's going to take place in January. So I think if you come and give your views and opinions, we'll then try and take all that. Now, we've got so much feedback from the 2 that we've had already. We need to distill those, working with the working group members into some clear recommendations, which you know, recognising resources has to be affordable for us to deliver. And at one point, I will be absolutely straight with this meeting, my team was servicing something like 200 meetings a year, and we are a much smaller team now, so it has to be something that's manageable and within our resource envelope. But we're very open to suggestions and thinking out of the box in terms of how we can best support you and your fellow committee members.
Councillor, I never disagree with anything Liz ever says, so I totally agree with everything she's said. To preface what I'm about to say, which was that I think there's merit in what you're talking about, and I think it links, as we all do, really, with this. This is principally there for the local community, isn't it? And I can reflect on a forum I was actually at in another part of the city from your area a couple of weeks ago, that was attended by over 70 residents, not on a single themed issue, on a number of issues relevant to those residents. And I actually thought, whilst that conversation was quite challenging in places, it was so meaningful for local people, and also meaningful for officers in terms of feedback. So I think there's probably a way of thinking about, as we work through the suggestions and the recommendations, that we can capture something like this, because I think it actually strikes at the heart of what we're trying to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stables.
It was just coming back to the point about location, because the outer northeast, we currently meet here, and my understanding is that the reason that we don't move around is because we don't have the facility to enable us to meet and to live stream it. So my question really is that something that's going to be looked at in terms of providing a facility for us to enable us to do that? Because at the moment, to me, we're just not getting that engagement at all. I mean, we get 0 people. Yeah.
That issue has been recorded and is being looked at as part of the review. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Tudor.
I agree with a great deal of what Councillor Akhtar said. The formal meeting structure, the fact that it's a committee meeting, the fact that it moves is probably why nobody comes to ours either. I would, it's almost I would think it might be almost a punishment to ask a resident to come to the committee meeting we have. And then one of our colleagues went to another part of the city and said she'd had a completely different experience, and it was well supported. So there's clearly very difficult. And I keep meaning to say to Councillor Harland that I was unwell last time the group met, but I'm intending to hopefully come on the 17th of January to look at community engagement and structure and how to make meetings more engaging. I'd just like to point out that in Crossgates and Winmore ward, they have a community meeting combined with a packed meeting. And that's where a lot of their engagement happens. And I haven't yet managed to get to that, but apparently that's very successful. In our meeting, we tend to turn up, fund things that are for our own ward, a few things that are cross ward, often to do with, say, police or services, listen to a few reports, which is good, and then we go home. I could do that on Zoom, really, but I was surprised to hear that they were set up in 2014, because I thought they were set up in 1914. How obsolete I find them in how they are. But then, as I say, apparently in some parts of the city they work really, really well. So it's great that the review is going on, and certainly in our ward, I'll finish is that perhaps a community meeting of some kind or other is the way we're going to go, because tonight I'm off to Gipton and Hare Hills to find a community centre there for the meeting, and I'll have to work out where it is because I'm not sure. So we know our own ward so well, we know our own people, and that is, I think, ward-based focused is going to be a thing that we're focusing on in the future. Thank you.
Councillor Harland.
Can I just say, John, that's one of the most fundamental reasons of why we started this review in the first place, because we want them to do what it says on the tin. We want it to be community focused, community engaged. We do have to have value for money, whether it's a community committee and a theme based, yet to be decided. But nothing off the table as far as community engagement is going. So please do come on the 17th.
I forgot to add, and this is something that I've made a big fuss about in the Inner East, is within the formal structure, and again, it varies across the city, but in the strict sense, and that's how our committee operates, and that's at the discretion of the chair. You can see residents sort of going like this to speak when there's a presentation going on, and they're not allowed to. And I think I find it enormously uncomfortable. But we've dealt with that in our area by by tonight, probably the first time, just an explanation of how we run things so people understand, and I don't have to sit there feeling uncomfortable that we are not listening to our residents when they've had their hand up for 15 minutes. But so all in hand.
Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. I think that different communities work in different ways, and there's been some raised eyebrows about the comment that Councillor Stables made about the Outer North East Community Committee. The reason that we were doing it was that we were live screening the community committee, because we had really, really good uptake during COVID, and we want to continue that, because when we did move it around the communities, we might get one person turned up that wasn't a ward member. So we have been looking at that. But the other thing, different community committee areas work in different ways, which will come out of that consultation. There are several, because we're in the outer northeast, we're heavily parished. So we have parishes in every single village where there are locally elected parish councillors, and ward councillors also attend those meetings. So members of the public do get to interact with us at that. And there are parish council forums that are held quarterly, and there are workshops that we can deliver. So there are lots of different things going on in different areas, because that is how we can facilitate that. So that might not work in the inner city because you don't have parish councils, but it does seem to work in the outer areas. So there are different things, different courses for different horses. So we'll see what comes out of the review. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I ask, by the way, as part of the review, you're talking a lot to elected councillors to feedback their experience of the meetings. There has been some commitment to talk to other people that attend the meetings, but they tend to be people that we're aware of, that get invitations and represent official tenants and residents organisations, etc. How are we actually trying to buy in all those people that don't turn up and don't know that community committees actually exist and why they exist? Are there any plans to engage with that? And you've just mentioned that it sounds like your team has reduced drastically in size. Would you be sharing, as part of the process, the family tree in terms of how communities as a department actually divides itself up and the reporting structure? I think that would be very useful for us to understand how we maximize best value out of the full department, as opposed to just focusing on a few individual officers within the community committee support secretariat.
So in terms of your first question about how we're going to engage the wider communities, it's going to be one of the questions that we talked to you all about, the community engagement. How would we best reach out to some of those communities? We're also in conversation with Voluntary Action Leeds and some of the infrastructure organisations, how they can support us in terms of reaching out to some of the clients that they support through their RELCAN network and others. And we will be also reaching out to co-optees of committees and also regular tenders, because we've got their details too, to get their views about how they'd like to see the meetings working differently. I've just heard Councillor Touser say that you've got members that are itching to get involved in the conversation. They attend and they're investing their time. So we want to get some feedback from them about how they'd like to see the meetings happen. So we will be doing some of that engagement in the new year as best we can. In terms of the structure of the team, you can actually see it already. If you've all got access to Insight, you can actually see the council structure every week. Every week or so, it's published updated structures for all the council departments are on Insight. So if you want me to show you how you can find them.
No, I think you need to talk about it as part of the review, in terms of us understanding what each different aspect is meant to do and how we can make best value of their expertise in the areas that they're in. I think it's quite good to give us a verbal explanation from the organisation itself as to how you see it works, as opposed to it just being an escalation graph. Do you see what I mean?
I'll take that away,
Yeah.
Councillor Galton. Yeah.
Councillor Anderson, you wanted to come back in?
Yeah. Next time we've got the meeting where I'm representing one of the representatives, is it possible to try and get information out to me well in advance so that I can then write out to all the members here and say, right, I'm going to be doing this. Fine, as you know, I'm quite happy to give you my personal view, but that's not necessarily the view of the scrutiny board. I'm giving my personal view, which is good in itself, but I need to, if I'm there to represent the whole of the scrutiny board, which I said I would do, I'd like to be able to say, look, these are the issues we're just about to discuss. Have you anything you want me to raise? And I'm actually quite good at even arguing against myself in that, you know, I can take contrary views and usually make a relatively coherent case for that particular individual, even though I might not necessarily personally agree with it.
Okay.
Consensus, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Stables.
I've just got one follow-up point actually, because Councillor Harrington just raised something with me when she was talking. So in terms of, because of course we do have parish councils and town councils in our area, and there is the forum for that. I'm just thinking whether we ought to also be thinking how those two interact, those two different types of committee forum. Thank you.
Prior to COVID, we did actually have a joint meeting. We used to have an annual meeting with all the town and parish councils, and I think that we are now looking at how we try to re-establish that. We did have a lead member for town and parish councils that would work with our exec member. I don't think we've got that liaison at the moment, so I know that Andy Hodson has had a chat with me just recently about how do we regroup and to re-establish those, because, and the other thing that I'm aware of is potentially some training for officers and members around the difference between a city councillor and a town and parish councillor and how they work together. So I think there is some programme of work in train to try and make some of those links. Councillor Stable.
Thank you. And just also, I'm just thinking about the community, so there's a clear understanding of how application for funding works, as in, you know, I'm just thinking from a resident perspective, you know, a committee group, you know, perspective from a ward, is there an opportunity within either of those structures for them to come and talk about what they're doing, you know, in the community to pitch for funding, you know, and how does that all fit in? So I don't understand that, so I'm not able to let anybody else know.
Yeah, no, we can look at that. Yeah.
Any further questions? Well done. Would you like to make a concluding statement, Councillor Howland?
Just thank you for all your comments here. Thank you for all your comments. We know everybody's busy, and you know, your commitment to attending these, and you know, we do say it's a listening exercise, and it really is. But once we've listened, doesn't mean to say that you know, that's it. We're hoping to. It is. I keep banging on about it. This is about you as elected members making your community committees work for you. Yes, but there's going to be things that are going to be similar. And on the thing about parish councils, I mean, we too in my ward we had 5. We've now got 4. They all work differently too. So a forum to speak together would be beneficial, but just continue to speak to us even if you're not at the meetings. And it's to me it's a really exciting piece of work, is this. Yes, we're all facing difficult decisions, but we need to take our residents and our communities along with us with that, and that's the forum to do it.
Right, what's the last item, Becky?
Just the work programme, Chair. If I can just ask members to note the work programme, I will move and send an updated invitation for next week's working group as requested. And if members could also be aware, there'll be 2 invitations coming out for the new year for additional working groups that the Chair had proposed would be useful on housing.
Any other business you wish to raise at this point before we go for our lunch?
In future, can you ask them?
Well, that's on public record. We're all cold. Thank you very much for your attendance, and hope you warm up